All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the massive ideological earthquakes that completely fractured American Protestantism at the turn of the 20th century. The very foundations of faith were just being shaken to their core by new science, new academic theories, and the really harsh realities of the Industrial Revolution. It was an era of intense transformation. And if you look at the cultural and religious landscape we live in today, the battle lines that were drawn back then are absolutely still echoing right now. So the ultimate question we're exploring today is this: how did American Christianity actually manage to survive and adapt during these intense 19th century crises? Because at the time, a lot of leaders felt that traditional religion was just dissolving under the pressure of modernization. We're going to look at how different factions fought to preserve their beliefs, whether that meant fiercely defending traditional boundaries or radically expanding what it meant to live out the gospel in a rapidly changing world. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1. Darwinism divides the church, 2. The battle for the Bible, 3. Enter Walter Rauschenbusch, 4. Ministry in Hell's Kitchen, and finally, 5. The social gospel movement. Let's get to it. Section 1. Darwinism divides the church, the theological reaction to evolution. Okay, the very first major battle line, it was permanently drawn back in 1859 when Charles Darwin dropped his theory of evolution in Origin of Species. It's fascinating how two completely distinct Christian reactions emerged against Darwin's theory. On one side, deists and theological liberals relied on natural theology. This was the idea of a clockmaker God, designing a beautiful world from above, rather than a brutal, messy evolution from below. But then, on the flip side, conservative evangelicals defended revealed theology, where they strictly adhered to a literal 7-day biblical creation. So both sides rejected Darwin's natural selection, but for completely different theological reasons. Stepping right into the fray was Charles Hodge. This guy was at the absolute bastion of orthodoxy, Princeton Theological Seminary, and he just laid down the law. He literally published a book plainly asking, "What is Darwinism?" And his uncompromising answer? It is atheism. No gray area there. Hodge threw a hard line in the sand, arguing that you simply could not be a Christian and believe in Darwin's theory. Moving on to Section 2, the battle for the Bible, defending biblical inerrancy. At the absolute heart of this fight was sola scriptura. You've probably heard this. It's that old Reformation battle cry, insisting that scriptures alone are the foundation for developing theology. Well, conservative scholars at Princeton, folks like Archibald Alexander Hodge and Benjamin Warfield, took this to mean the Bible was totally inerrant, meaning completely free from any errors whatsoever, from Genesis all the way to Revelation. But actually, scratch that. This strict view was about to be seriously challenged from inside the church. So, as you can imagine, the institutional fallout from this was massive. Just massive. When Professor Charles A. Briggs even suggested that there might be tiny, minuscule typographical errors in the Bible, wow, he was put on trial and found guilty. Because of this, Union Theological Seminary famously broke away to become a completely independent institution. It really exposed this growing divide where northern seminaries were leaning liberal and southern seminaries really dug their heels in and stayed strictly orthodox. All right, Section 3. Enter Walter Rauschenbusch, a bridge between two worlds. While those theological battles were raging in the academic ivory towers, a totally different, much more pragmatic response was brewing on the ground. Meet Walter Rauschenbusch. Born in the boom town of Rochester, New York, into a bilingual German-American family, this guy became a crucial bridge. He was uniquely equipped to take complex European theology and actually apply it to the practical, everyday American pastoral scene. Brilliant scholar, strong evangelical roots, but his life was about to take a dramatic turn. If we trace his timeline, you'll see a life profoundly shaped by unexpected pivots. In 1886, he makes a huge pastoral move to New York City. Total game changer. Then, a tragic turn 11 years later in 1897, an onset of deafness actually forces him to return home to Rochester. But you know what? He used that setback to write powerfully. He ended up publishing his defining masterpiece in 1907 before passing away in 1918, right as World War I was ending. Now, theologically speaking, Rauschenbusch remained a staunch, lifelong Baptist. He was totally convinced that non-hierarchical churches were the ultimate vessels for what he called primitive Christianity, basically the pure, original ideals of the first century church. He actually believed that highly bureaucratic, hierarchical churches stood in the way of a modern democratic society, and that local democratic congregations were best suited to bring God's kingdom to earth. Which brings us to Section 4, Ministry in Hell's Kitchen, the raw edge of the Industrial Revolution. So, thrust into a German-speaking church on the west side of New York City in 1886, Rauschenbusch comes face to face with a really grim reality. He's watching hardworking families barely surviving in a neighborhood notoriously known as Hell's Kitchen. I mean, extreme poverty, deplorable tenement housing, kids having literally nothing but busy, dangerous city streets for playgrounds. It left a permanent mark on his soul. He just couldn't reconcile the suffering of these laborers with a faith that only focused on the afterlife. And that leads us to Section 5, the Social Gospel Movement, Kingdom Theology in Action. This stark, undeniable reality of urban poverty, it birthed the Social Gospel Movement. It was a direct, action-oriented response to the brutal miseries of modernization. Alongside some sympathetic pastors in the neighborhood, he forms the Brotherhood of the Kingdom. And this is key. They proved that you could keep strong Orthodox evangelical roots, like preaching sin and salvation, while also actively demanding systemic social justice. They didn't just pray for the poor, they were out there fighting for better tenement housing and pushing to build safe playgrounds so kids wouldn't get run over in the streets. To them, the gospel had to touch the physical reality of a person's life, not just their soul. He eventually funneled all of this passion into his seminal 1907 book, Christianity and the Social Crisis. He laid out this incredibly powerful 5-part argument. He starts with the Old Testament prophets' fierce demand for justice for the marginalized, right? Then he highlights Jesus' own teachings on caring for the sick and poor. He points out the tragic historical decline of these social aims in the church, calls out the present crisis of the church turning a blind eye to industrial suffering, and ends with a huge, urgent mandate of exactly what to do to fix it. Now, even though he was forced back to Rochester due to his fading hearing, Rauschenbusch absolutely did not retreat. No way. Instead, he spent the rest of his life transforming the city into a modern model of how Christianity can positively influence public policy and economics. He never even held political office, but his writings and teachings molded the social consciousness of an entire generation. It just goes to show that a physical impairment couldn't stop him from becoming one of the most influential Christian thinkers of his time. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. How do these deep historical clashes over science, the strict inerrancy of Scripture, and the demanding call for social justice continue to define the fractured yet totally fascinating identity of American Christianity today? Think about it, we are literally still having these exact same conversations. Thanks so much for exploring this with us.